In today's video, I'm going to be assembling a pure performance gaming PC build that's going to cost you in and around $900. A system that focuses above all else on achieving great frame rates at 1080p and 1440p in the latest AAA titles, and uses components that provide the best possible value for money on the market right now. As always, I'll be walking you guys through the parts I've picked and why, including some alternative choices you may want to consider, the build process from start to finish, and looking at the all-important gaming benchmarks later to see exactly how this thing really stacks up. The Valkyrie V240 and V360 are here, with high-speed pumps for high thermal efficiency, S12 fans which are optimized for radiators, and a 5-year warranty. The V-Series is stacked with features. A 3.5-inch LCD screen sits front and center, letting you show off key performance metrics at a quick glance, with an epic unboxing experience, great performance, and unique visual design, which round off an awesome package. Learn more at the first links in the description below. I want to begin today's video by giving you a quick rundown of the parts I've selected and why. And I'm going to begin by talking about the CPU and GPU combo, because straight off the bat, you've actually got two options. Now, the CPU is going to remain the same. AMD's Ryzen 5 7600 is the best choice in my opinion. You can often find the 7600X for a similar price too. The only real difference is that the X comes a bit factory overclocked with some slightly faster speeds. Ultimately, in a budget build, you want to go for the cheapest, well-performing CPU you can find, and this Ryzen 5 7600 is going to do a great job of that for well below $200 and £200. Latest pricing for everything will be linked at the affiliate links in the description below. Now, for the GPU, you've got two choices. If you want to keep strictly to that $900 budget I talked about, you'll want this, the RX 9060 XT 8GB. But if you have got the extra cash to spend, the same card but with the 16GB variant would be the one I would go for. Now, you might be thinking, James, what's the difference? Honestly, nothing. They're identical in every other way, apart from, of course, the video memory and the fact these cards have slightly different coolers. But you can buy both coolers in both RAM variants. Now, if you're only really playing 1080p, you're only really playing esports titles like Fortnite, Apex Legends, CS2, then the 8GB card will be fine. The 16GB card is better for 1440p gaming and better for future-proofing. We've seen it already with games like Indiana Jones, which just don't like 8GB GPUs, and they really impact performance. So as I say, if you can afford the 16GB model, please do go for it. But the 8GB card in terms of price to performance is, according to the data, slightly better, even if it's also kind of flawed. In terms of the motherboard that I've gone for, obviously going for a Ryzen CPU gives us access to the AM5 platform, and the ASRock Pro Series, the B850M RS Wi-Fi, is a really awesome shout. Now, this runs on the latest B850 chipset, and you might say, well, James, couldn't you go for B650? Wouldn't that be even cheaper still? And the answer would be yes, but not by very much. This board is currently on promotion for well under $150. That makes it one of the cheapest viable B850 boards out there. And crucially, this motherboard comes as standard with Wi-Fi on board, which I think is really important. For the RAM and SSD in today's build, I've gone for two products from TeamGroup. Not sponsored, they're just really great value for money. The Vulcan DDR5 is one of the cheapest memory kits on the market. Whoa, let me stop you right there. It's James from the future here, and since filming this video, we've seen some absolutely crazy stuff going on with the price of SSDs, but mainly memory. Now, at the time of filming this video, this RAM cost about $80 to $85 on Newegg. You're now looking at basically double that, if not even higher. And honestly, memory's kind of a mess right now. A lot of this is due to the OpenAI deal that got announced recently, where they've basically bought up loads of memory modules, which has then basically caused a shock in the market. Hopefully, we'll see this start to stabilize and even maybe fall as we get towards that Black Friday period. I'll be honest, I was in two minds about whether this video on its pure performance basis still made sense, but I came to the conclusion it does. You ultimately just need to try and find the best value 32GB DDR5 kit you can, and maybe even explore the used market. Not an area I'd normally recommend, but keep your options open. Some regions are worse than others, and hopefully this pricing comes down and comes down sharpish. At MSRP prices, this build makes sense, and a couple of weeks ago it was very achievable for that $900 price point, but in the current market, you may have to be more flexible, especially with memory and storage. Anyway, let's get back to the video where I think I'm about to talk about the memory color and design. This particular kit is dark gray, which I think again looks good, but it's not RGB. Having some lighting on here is going to set us back more money. And as you can see, this is just going to do the job more than nicely. It's a really sleek, really well-performing kit, and that's the most important thing. For the SSD, TeamGroup's MP44L is not the cheapest NVMe drive out there, but it's going to work great for today's build with a range of capacity options available too. For cooling, I have picked up what I would say is an optional part for today's build. Our Ryzen CPU, based on the size of the box, does come with a stock cooler, but I'm not a fan of stock coolers. They're noisy, they're loud, they don't do a great job of cooling the chip, and especially if you go for the 7600X, what we want is something with the capacity to make sure the CPU can boost to its max speed. Now, this Thermalright Assassin X120 is going to be perfect. It is, to my knowledge, one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest tower air coolers on the market, but it does everything that we need really, really well. So you can see here it's got 4 heat pipes which go into this standard heatsink array. You can see here we've got our nice little cold contact plate, and you get an included 120mm fan. It is pretty cheap and pretty cheerful, but Thermalright commonly rank as some of the best coolers on our lineup, and when you consider price, they wipe the floor with basically everybody else. I'm going to actually go ahead and install the CPU and the cooler first, but before I do that, I am going to talk briefly about the case I've picked up today, and of course, the power supply for this system. Let's start with the power supply. This is the MSI MAG A650BN, and it's an 80 plus bronze certified 650 watt power supply. 650 watts is going to be enough for today's build. The 9060 XT is really power efficient, and the only other card you would consider for this system really is the 5060. The AMD card's better, but if you did get the 5060, this is going to work fine too. You can see if I actually open this up, it's a pretty basic power supply, but frankly, that's all we need. It's non-modular, so everything cable-wise is pre-attached, and there is no PCI Gen 5 connection. So support for those top-end graphics cards, well, I mean, the wattage isn't enough anyway, but if the wattage was enough, the lack of any PCI Gen 5 power cable is going to hold you back. Final thing to talk about is the case, and for the chassis today, I have gone for Montech's XR Wood. And if you saw my recent best cases video, where I talked about the best PC cases right now, you'll know that I'm a big fan of Montech for a few reasons. Now, this case here has a tempered glass side panel, so that's nice. Up front, we've got 3 120mm fans, and at the back, a single 120mm, and these are all ARGB, which is going to look rather nice. Support for standard ATX and, of course, our micro ATX motherboard right here. And at the back, you'll find, of course, all your fan cables are sort of kind of pre-run. This is the only product really where you probably could spend less money. There are so many cheap cases on Amazon and Newegg, but you still want something that's going to provide good cooling. You still want something with good GPU support, and honestly, for the money that this is, it works really well for the build today. So with that, I am going to go ahead and install the CPU into the motherboard first off, and kick off with our Ryzen 5 7600. There it is. In terms of how the CPU is installed, it's an easy task of just pushing the arm down and then, of course, releasing the CPU socket. I'm then going to drop the processor into place, and you should be able to see just here, we've got a little golden triangle. We want to match that triangle up with the triangle on the socket and then return the arm down without too much bother. I'm going to do the RAM or the memory next up. 4 RAM DIMMs on this board, which is good. I remember the older boards we used to build with here on the channel would only have 2 if they were cheaper. We've come a long way since then, which is good to see. Get it lined up, click it in, and a top tip, this little label should face towards the CPU. Get that one clicked in as well, and just make sure the alignment's really good, because if it isn't, it won't go in. And then secure it down like so. For the next step, I'm going to go ahead and take my screwdriver. I'm going to need to swap out the end for a smaller end, and that's going to enable me to just remove the top M.2 heatsink just here and gain access to the M.2 slot, which I'll need to install TeamGroup's MP44L. In terms of how it installs, the little gold contact strip is going to slot into the gold contact points on the M.2 slot, push it in, and then secure it down. The M.2 heatsink is actually going to do a lot of the hard work for us in terms of actually keeping the drive into place. So once that's all lined up, return those 2 screws, and that's your M.2 drive and memory all complete. In terms of the cooler, I'm also going to install this now. In order to do that, I'm going to remove the stock brackets that come pre-installed. So that's these plastic ones at the top and the bottom. I then need to add the 4 AMD posts that come included with the cooler. They go onto each corner of the CPU, like so. And then I'm going to add these brackets on top and secure them down with the 4 screws that come included in the cooler box. I'm then going to add a drop of thermal paste paste onto the processor. You do get some thermal paste included with the cooler, but I tend to use Arctic's MX6 just because it's what we use for all of our cooler testing, so we know that it's really good. Get that lined up a little something like so you can see these two, they're kind of thumb screws, but actually they're also have a screw thread on, so you can get them tight by hand, but I would always go ahead and finish them off manually with a screwdriver, because for coolers, contact is so important and you don't want to risk whether or not you've tightened them up enough. One thing I always wondered when I started building PCs, how tight should they be? They should go all the way until they stop. So you can see there, we found the natural stop, and that is going to be perfect. With the motherboard assembly ready to go, the next thing we need to do is check where the standoffs are in the case. These are the posts that the actual motherboard is going to secure onto. And that can only mean one thing, is return of the handheld James Cam. So let me take you on an adventure. Inside the case, you should be able to see some standoffs. So we've got one in the top left, one in the middle, and one in the top right. We've then got a further 1, 2, and 3 down here, which are perfect. And the one we're bothered about is this one just here. That is what we need for Micro ATX. We don't need to populate any of these other holes, and we also want to make sure this hole is empty. Once that's been confirmed, you can then check the holes on the motherboard and make sure they match up. And with that confirmed, the motherboard can just slide on into place. A little something like this. How easy was that? There is a criticism of the case I can actually give here, which is that none of the standoffs are actually raised, which means the motherboard won't hold itself into place. So I'm going to leave that there for now. We'll find some screws. Let's just cut that. With the motherboard in place, I'm going to do the power supply next and all the cables and wiring. And I am going to guide you guys through exactly what the cabling and wiring looks like for this build. So if you want to copy it at home yourself, you can absolutely do that. If you don't want to do any cables and wiring and you're based in the UK and you don't even want to build this system, we do actually have a pre-building company called GeekaPC where you can buy systems exactly like this for a range of different price points, budget resolutions. I've talked about it a bit in videos. We've got quite a lot of support. So thank you very much, and I'll link it down below if you happen to be interested. Anyway, sliding the power supply in goes a little something like so, and as you can see at the back here, these 4 screw holes are all going to line up nice and easily. Use the included power supply screws that come with the case to secure the power supply down. In terms of power cables, I'm going to start off with the motherboard power cable. Now you can see here, this is actually the largest by quite some margin, and is going to clip in to this little port on the right hand side of the motherboard. Now a quick glance at the motherboard shows that we need at least an 8-pin CPU power connector, so that's a 4 plus 4 pin design, and you can see here that is what that looks like. You can tell it's 4 plus 4 because it will actually split into half should you so need it to. Locate the CPU power cable in the top corner, and I'll sometimes take any dust filters off so I can see a bit more clearly. There we go. Once that's lined up, it will click in nice and easily. The final power cables to deal with really are all of the front panel cables. I'll start off with the headphone mic jack, which goes to the bottom left of the motherboard. It's keyed so it only goes in one way round. USB 3 is unusually at the bottom of the board as well, so I'm going to do that one next, followed by the JFP one, which is on the bottom right hand side of the board, and then finally our USB-C, which is just under the motherboard power cable from a little bit earlier. The only other bit of cabling and wiring I would recommend at this stage is the fans. Now all the fans for this build have daisy chain wires, which is great. That means they plug into each other. So you should just have one 4-pin PWM fan header and one 3-pin 5-volt ARGB header into the motherboard, and that should control all the fans. For now though, it's time to install the graphics card. Now as mentioned earlier, I am going to go for the 16 gig 9060 XT, but as much as the 8 gig card has its challenges, if you're really tight on budget, it's still a good option, and it's still going to be a card that's better than any alternatives at its price point. Now, although this card might sound elaborate 3-fan cooling design, it's small. It's probably one of the most compact 3-fan cards that you can really find on the market. In fact, if I grab a 2-fan, and this is regarded as a relatively compact Founders Edition 5080, you can see how small this card is. Now then, what I'm going to do, and also, by the way, that card costs more than this whole build, which is crazy. I'm going to go ahead and install this into the case. So I'm just going to screw out the little cover on the PCI lanes and remove the top 2 slots. I'm going to make sure the PCI latch is pushed back, which it is, and then slide the card into place. I'm going to then go ahead and just screw the graphics card in. You might want to just kind of hold it up while you do this. Add into place both of those screws. So of course, one in the middle and one further up at the top. And then I'm going to thread through some GPU power cables. Specifically, I need a single 8-pin power connector for the graphics card. Just there. That's not bad. And the next step is to turn this thing on. looking pretty good, and I've set the system up for some benchmarking. Now, I think it looks really nice. I'm not sure whether the RGB and wood paneling necessarily works, or whether a set colour with the wood accents would look a little bit cleaner. Let me know in the comments below. Now, I've tested a wide variety of games, some of the most popular titles out there, using this machine with both a 9060 XT 8GB and a 16GB card. For benchmarking, I'll be using this Iyama Red Eagle G-Master gaming monitor. I've picked it because it's a fairly good value, affordable panel with a 2560 by 1440p resolution, so I can benchmark the system in both 1080 and 1440p, a fast 1 millisecond response time, and a 180Hz maximum refresh rate. This sits kind of in the middle of their lineup between their more entry-level Black Eagle and their top-end Gold Phoenix panels, and I'll link it down below. Now, the first game I tested out was Marvel's Rivals. Here I tested at 1080p on the high preset to begin with, and kicking off with the 16GB 9060 XT, I saw a pretty strong average frame rate of 126.5. I was really pleased with this and thought it represented great performance, and when swapping out to the 8GB card, was actually shocked at how much frame rate we lost. Often the impact of VRAM is greater at high resolutions, but it looks like Marvel's Rivals is fairly VRAM heavy, as at 1080p on the 8GB variant, the average frame rate dropped to 104 frames per second. Moving through to Cyberpunk 2077 at 1440p this time, on the high preset, and beginning with the 8GB card. Here the 8GB 9060 XT pulled in an average of 84.7 frames per second, while tuning up to the 16GB version only yielded an extra 3 FPS at identical settings. If anything, I expected it might be the other way around, that Cyberpunk might have a more pronounced frame rate improvement based on the VRAM than Marvel's Rivals, especially at this higher resolution. Moving through to F1 2025, and again starting off with the 8GB RX 9060 XT, and the build achieved an average frame rate of 114.7 FPS. That's not bad using the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode, and provided a solid gaming experience for the price. But tune up to the 16GB 9060 XT, and that average frame rate skyrockets to 146.5 on average. A pretty massive difference here. Moving through to the brand new Battlefield 6 at 1080p high settings across the board, and I was pretty impressed with this result with both GPU configurations. Starting off with the 8GB card first of all, and here the average frame rate was just shy of 120 frames per second, while tuning up to the 16GB 9060 XT gives a frame rate boost of nearly 6 FPS, moving through to just under 125 on average. Not a huge amount of difference then here, and arguably not worth the price premium of the 16GB card, but at 1440p, I'm sure we'd see a much bigger difference. In Fortnite at 1080p competitive settings, that's with everything tuned down to low except the render distance, which was set to far, the 8GB RX 9060 XT pulled in an average of 268 FPS, more than competitive enough at 1080p, while moved through to the 16GB card, and we did see a booster frame rate up to 288. In Apex Legends on the 8GB 9060 XT, again testing at the 1080p high preset, the average frame rate was 258 frames per second, while tuning up to the 16GB variant, pushed frame rates to around 290, while finally in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which is known to be a very demanding title and again VRAM intensive, the 8GB 9060 XT configuration of this build at 1440p high pulled in 59.5 frames per second on average, while tuning up to the 16GB version of the 9060 XT pushed the frame rate up to a staggering 93. The trend here then is that we do see a pretty substantial improvement across the board, and VRAM is a really fundamental part of the picture. It shows, if anything, that both the 5060 and 9060 XT were really made with the wrong variants. They should have been made with 12 gigs of VRAM overall. Again, if you can afford the 16GB card, I strongly recommend it, and I hope the data in the benchmarking section backs that up. But if you can't afford the 16GB card and you want to stick in budget, the 8GB unit is still very capable. It just has a few notable compromises. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to get subscribed. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.